Welcome back, folks, to another episode of It Takes a Village podcast. I have another special guest on, Ceilidh Smith, somebody who I've known for a very long time and been trying to follow for the last several years. She has a master's in forestry from UBC and a master's in science from the Swedish University of Agriculture. Maybe I got that wrong. But definitely tons of expertise in the environmental field, and we're super excited to tap into some of her knowledge. So welcome, Ceilidh.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to hear all the things that you've done in the last 10, 15 years. You've gone across the globe in your research and some of your work. Can you just kind of tell us, your upbringing, where you started and what you're doing now?
Yeah, for sure. So my story kind of starts in the Fraser Valley on traditional Stolo territory. That's where I grew up. My mom is a teacher. My dad is an avid outdoors person, and he now works in conservation. And so both of them, both of their careers, their passions related to those two fields definitely influenced me a lot growing up. In the Fraser Valley, I also grew up surrounded by nature, so very privileged. The house that we grew up in was very close to lots of beautiful forests and streams. My dad is also from the interior of BC originally, so grew up spending a lot of time hiking and camping out there. So yeah, I grew up outside a lot with my family, with my parents, and that appreciation for our environment, especially in a province like British Columbia, was just something that was always a part of my life. And it's something that I feel like I really tapped into again late in my high school career. I had a really influential biology teacher in grade 11 and 12 who really kind of inspired and ignited this passion for the environment and conservation and all of these kind of questions and challenges that we have around climate change and environmental degradation. And so I really was tapping back into those early childhood memories and like this appreciation for the environment that I had growing up in late high school, and then decided to go to UBC. After I graduated from high school, I did a Bachelor of Science in Conservation through the Faculty of Forestry at UBC. And just as a student, as a young professional during those times, I got to travel all over BC working as a research assistant on wildfires across the province. I got to travel to Switzerland and Germany and Italy for a field school course. I also got to study for a semester in Hawaii. So I got like this localized BC perspective on conservation, but I also got this really awesome kind of global perspective as well, and just be able to see the differences, but also the parallels between environmental issues in different places. So then I graduated from my bachelor's, and then I decided to do my master's. That was my master's of science in Sweden at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. And then I decided to come back to UBC as well and do my master's of forestry at UBC.
Mm.
So yeah, that's kind of like my journey, my background up until the present day now.
And my understanding is that you're now the education manager for Sierra Club. Are they
Mhm.
based out of Vancouver?
Yeah, so Sierra Club BC, we have main offices in Vancouver and Victoria. I'm based out of the Vancouver one, and yeah, I'm the education program manager. Just some context for Sierra Club. It's the longest standing environmental charity in BC. It started in 1969. And yeah, all of the work that we do is around kind of advocacy for the environment, but also like education and community outreach about the environment as well.
And when you look at Instagram, Sierra Club BC has about 35,000
Mhm.
followers. It's not a small organization. It's pretty large. And then if you look even further, Sierra Club, I'm assuming, the world Instagram page has about 350,000 followers. So definitely a huge following. I think you guys are doing some great work. Definitely want to tap into some of your knowledge, but um, did you anticipate this kind of avenue for your career? Like, was this something that you wanted to do your whole life?
Yeah, I think in some ways it surprised me, and in some ways it's definitely surprised my family in other ways. Like I said, it makes sense from the perspective of I grew up in this really kind of avid outdoors family, really appreciating nature, spending a lot of time in nature. Um, I would say I've always been like a person that's interested in lots of different things. I've never been a person where like I have my one passion or like the one thing that drives me. I feel like I like to dabble in lots of different things. Um, but what really surprised, I think especially my parents, and myself too a little bit, but I feel like I understand it more having gone through the journey is pursuing sciences specifically. I was a strong student, but math particularly was always very difficult for me. And just like with sciences, you inevitably have to also study math, and that's a big part of it. So for me, that was more so of like a hurdle that I had to overcome throughout my career was just getting good at math and yeah, figuring it out along the way. But all of the other parts of my research and my academic career and everything that I find so interesting and I'm so passionate about, like that really outweighed kind of the challenges that came up along the way. So, yeah, I would say in some ways it's been surprising, like in a good way to see where I've ended up, but also kind of in hindsight, I can see how this avenue, this journey that I've gone down, I still get to dabble in a lot of different things. And that's ultimately, I think, the kind of person that I am. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Why? And so, in your world of teaching people about the
Mhm.
environment and connection to nature, why does that matter?
Yeah, so many reasons. I would say, particularly in this era where, we're experiencing kind of these compound effects in the science world, we call them wicked problems of climate change and environmental degradation, where there's just so many inputs, so many complex factors that are all interconnected, intertwined. um, they're these immense challenges that we have locally, like they affect us in our local communities, they affect us on a regional level, they affect us on a national and a global level. And so part of what I see as being so valuable about environmental education is of course like knowledge is power, providing people the information that they need to be the next generation of problem solvers. If you're an adult learner, if you're an adult student, like, of course, you can take on problem solving now. So it's providing knowledge to people that's really critical in these times where we have these challenges. But I think also just with a lot of our media diets, there tends to be kind of this doom and gloom atmosphere when it comes to talking about these problems like climate change, environmental issues, which can honestly be a bad thing in terms of progress and striving for solutions. When we come at these issues solely from that lens of doom and gloom, it can actually be quite debilitating and overwhelming. And psychologically, there's a lot of psychology research out there that shows it causes people to shut down and actually not act and not want to be part of the solution.
Hmm.
So how I really see education is this empowerment and giving people agency, showing them how they have agency when it comes to these challenges, and that it's okay if you feel anxious or overwhelmed about these things, but then how do we kind of translate those more negative emotions into localized action and affecting change that you have control over, in your day-to-day life in your communities.
And a great segue to the next question: how can nature change how we think, feel, and learn in general?
Yeah. Um,
Or
Something that I think.
and maybe I can
Sure.
reframe that or expand it too. I mean, not just I mean, I think when I say nature, people think, "Oh, walk through the forest," or whatever, but, maybe just in the environment in general.
For sure. Yeah. Something that I also really stress in my educational approach in my role at Sierra Club is that we all relate to nature, the environment in our own way. You can relate to and appreciate the environment through things like sport and physical activity. That's one way that people relate to nature. You can relate to it through art, language, people have cultural and spiritual connections to nature. It's part of people's identities. And so there's a lot of different ways as humans that nature matters to us. We can think of it from a really pragmatic perspective where, things like natural resources, the things that we need to survive and live, and how we've set up our societies and communities are very dependent on these natural systems. And so I like to stress in my educational approach that there's all these different ways that we can look at the environment and that we can value the environment. There's no kind of one set of values that is more important than all of the other values out there when it comes to appreciating nature. So that's oftentimes my goal is, I think especially, we tend to maybe look at nature through its pragmatic or economic value, like what it gives to us in terms of resources. That, of course, is super important. I also want people through education to see all the other values that nature provides, yeah, to our well-being, our physical well-being, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. There's so many things that nature provides us outside of, just kind of the practical
Mhm.
resources and economics.
So I wanna kind of focus in on the province, and then we can kinda
Mhm.
work the lens, out a bit. What are you seeing in BC in terms of, environmental change,
Mhm.
support, that kinda thing?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think being just like growing up in the decade that I grew up in, and then going to university studying things like climate change, researching climate change and our forests across the province, specifically from a wildfire lens, but then I've worked on a handful of different research projects. Um, it's interesting how there have been climate impacts and environmental impacts. For me personally, um, like as an example, doing research in the interior, we were researching and studying past wildfires, but then of course you're also doing that research during a season, which is the summer, where wildfires are also just raging around us, and how those wildfires displace people from their homes. Forests, again, we think of those many different value systems that people have and those connections that people have to their forests, to their local environments, and that to be gone. Those are really devastating. I can also think of, for example, in Abbotsford, we had a really bad flood season this past winter, but then particularly in 2021, that was a really unprecedented flood season for the city of Abbotsford. And it was a result of these different compounding effects of climate change, seeing these, unprecedented atmospheric river events, coupled with wildfires that were really strong in the summer and that kind of prevented a lot of the natural stabilization. Like trees and forests provide a lot of stabilization for other ecosystems like water, rivers, streams. And so then once that's gone because of a wildfire, there are those compounding effects in wintertime, where we have these mass flooding events, and so many other factors as well that contribute to these, what we consider to be like really catastrophic disasters. And so I see these different events, and I know people, whether they experience them personally or they're seeing them in the media on the news, we're all quite aware of these different events that are taking place. And alongside that, I see a lot of resilience, and I see a lot of community communities coming together, and in instances where I can think of in Abbotsford or communities that have faced wildfires, just this, yeah, immense um generosity and just like caring for your neighbor, and all these incredible things that we do as humans in these hard times. We come together, um and for me, I think that's really what we need to be doing, but on a more proactive level, if that makes sense. So like
Hmm.
coming together as communities, in preparation of, extreme weather events, different natural disasters that might be on the horizon for us.
Hmm.
If we can kind of take that community capacity and that resilience building, and apply that to like this long term future looking, yeah, lens,
Hmm.
then I think that's really what we need, and we're already seeing it in different ways around the province, so I find that really promising personally.
We can get into a little bit later, and I think I already know the answer to this, but are we experiencing global warming, climate change? Like, or how do you define what people are fearful of right now? Or there's the other side of the aisle as well, where people don't
Mhm.
believe anything is happening right now. Where do you
For
land?
sure. Yeah, personally, as someone who has spent the last 7 years studying and researching um, climate change and what's happening to our environment, I can unfortunately say that climate change and global warming are very real. And to provide a little bit of distinction between those two phrases, like we often use them interchangeably. We, replace them depending on the context,
Hmm.
in media and things like that. But global warming is referring to the fact that, since the Industrial Revolution, so late 1700s, early 1800s, where we have this really accelerated human activity around burning fossil fuels, for all aspects of our lives. Since that period in history, the average temperature of the Earth's surface has been increasing, and that increase is correlated with our increase of burning fossil fuels and our demand for fossil fuels. So global warming is specifically referring to like the average Earth temperature,
Hmm.
and of course that doesn't relate to, regional weather, and we can still have cold periods and things like that. It doesn't mean that it's going to be warm all the time. Um, and then climate change, it's a little bit more holistic in that climate is referring to precipitation, wind events, the temperature, all of those components that make up our weather as we experience it on, regional levels. Climate change is looking at the long term patterns and trends of weather events, around the world, but then also regionally as well. And we're seeing things like extreme weather events happening more frequently, more intensely. So things like atmospheric rivers, where there's this really large flooding event that happens, or wildfires that are maybe more intense, more devastating. Those are climate change impacts. Um, I'm not sure if that answered the question, if there is another part of the question.
No, no, you did. I'm kind of curious now. Like we kind of talked about the overwhelming part of
Mhm,
social media being, debilitating to some people. And,
mhm,
even today, for example, myself looking at Twitter, and I follow a bunch of different scientists and people who study weather patterns or, those kinds of things. There was one person today who said, the mother of all heat domes will be arriving in 2 weeks in
yeah.
the Western hemisphere here.
Mhm,
And I kinda wonder, like, the one in 2021 was pretty
mhm,
bad, and if this
right.
is, turns out to be, coming true, then, it's like, "Okay, well, what's that gonna look like?" And so I wonder when you hear some of these things and you hear about, China burning coal and they're not trying to get to net zero, et cetera, what can we do? Like what's one small thing that we can do, being, a smaller population and neighbors to the US?
Yeah, absolutely. And like this is part of the challenge, right? Is that we our environmental systems, even though it might be easier, or we may like to think of them as in they're isolated systems. They are incredibly connected to our politics, our socio-cultural systems. Like all of these things are very connected, and we can't look at each of these systems in isolation. They all play a role. They all are very interwoven with one another.
Mhm,
And so when I think about, like future climate impacts, whether it's a heat dome, flooding, whatever it may be. My role as an educator and in some ways as like a researcher, a communicator, uh, is to try and make climate change, try and I guess, make it so that climate change isn't this big, abstract, overwhelming concept, and really apply it to people's local reality, the region that they live in, the community that is very tangible to them. Um, and in that way, we can build resiliency as like these kind of pockets and regional communities. We can work towards solutions and actions. People become more civically engaged on a provincial, federal, international level when they see the reality in this kind of tangible world of theirs.
mhm.
They're able to make those connections. And I think environmental education in this way is for everyone, no matter their age or background. But I think specifically with youth, that's so important, to be able to raise um, children into adults who are, civically engaged and have this kind of this worldview. I think is so important. And so for sure, I'm human, so I feel the same concern and anxiousness and worry that everyone else does.
Mhm.
But I also know that we all have so much agency in this. There's so much that we can do on these local levels. And so that's what I really try to focus my energy into.
So on that lens, if there are concerns that we have as, as a taxpayer, is the best option to talk to our neighbors, talk to our local government, those kinds of things, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, I think being an engaged citizen, when if it's in your local government, if it's on a provincial level, a federal level, I think all of those things are awesome. Something that we do pretty frequently at Sierra Club is we'll host letter writing events. So you can write, we basically take you through the process of, okay, what is like a concern about the environment that you have? How do you educate yourself on, different policies in our province that are going to affect the environment, that are going to affect these natural systems that you care about? And then once you have that knowledge and that information, how do you convey that to your MLA through a handwritten letter? It means a lot to MLAs when they receive a handwritten letter to someone as opposed to an email or seeing things on social media, because it communicates that urgency and like how much you care about this to have
Mhm.
sent them a handwritten letter. And so for us as an organization, we know that people have busy lives. There's so much that is going on in each of our lives, and so we take the time to kind of take you through this process in like a 1 hour webinar workshop, so that by the end of it, you can do your part in writing this letter to your MLA about something that concerns you. And you can send it off to them, and it makes them aware of that issue. I think that is just like one example of what we try to do at Sierra Club. to help people become more civically engaged. Because unfortunately, it's something that we're not necessarily taught all that often.
Mhm.
It may come up depending on the type of teacher or classes that you had in school. But I think in a democracy, in a healthy democracy, there is like this feedback, this back and forth dialogue between our government representatives and society, and the people that they are serving. And so that's something that I just really encourage people is you don't have to do it alone. I know it seems like it can be really daunting, especially if you're you're not really sure where to start in terms of civic engagement, but Sierra Club is a great place to start if you're interested in that. We can help guide you through that process.
I don't wanna be a pessimist, but I have to ask, is there, one thing that you're worried about in terms of conservation, forestry, environment? Is there one thing that sticks out to you right now?
Like one Yes, I would say, unfortunately, this is more of a generalization in terms of the political landscape of our province right now. Of course, there are always individuals in our governments, that, don't make up the majority sentiment or they, oppose certain actions by the government. But as a general statement. I do worry about the state of forestry in our province. It hasn't seemed to click in certain ways that the way that our forests are being managed across the province, it is a finite resource. People's local careers and livelihoods are dependent upon forestry. We also have wildfire events every year. We as climate change, becomes even more of a pressing concern, we will experience things like pest outbreaks and diseases that also impact forestry. And I don't necessarily see the key leaders in British Columbia as acknowledging this and acknowledging how our management of forests is very industry run and not even local industry. Like again, speaking to those communities and those people who depend upon forestry industry for their livelihoods. These are like transnational corporations, transnational industries, so that's also not really benefiting our local economy and our local communities either. And so that's something that I do worry about, and that's something that we um, speak about and advocate for very strongly at Sierra Club and in my work. Um, and again, I think the more that people are aware of this, we can make people aware of it. Eventually, the pressure will be too much for our government, our system to be like, okay, we're just going along with the status quo. Now we need to change things.
And to flip it, let's focus on the optimism. What is your thought with the up and coming generation? Is there hope for them? What are some things that you're seeing?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think I feel so grateful constantly as an educator. Especially when I get to go into schools or I often engage with teachers and educators in the province. We do free workshops for schools across the province, but then we also do free professional development workshops for teachers to basically help them if they want to bring the environment into their curriculum, into the way that they're teaching their students. And whenever I get to engage with people, whether it's adults or youth, I am just so blown away by the curiosity that people have, the engagement, and all of the different ways, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, all of the different ways and values, um, like people connect to and relate to their environments. I think that's so important, and so I personally feel a lot of hope for the future when I engage with those people and I get to kind of visit these different communities that aren't my own community, but I see how they have structured themselves as a community network, how they're uplifting their youth, how they're taking care of each other. Yeah, that provides me a lot of hope for the future.
And I'm big on outdoor ed, even though it wasn't a course that I taught, but I'm a bit of a risk taker in the sense of let's get outside the classroom. We don't need to be in the brick and mortar four walls. Let's learn outside. What are some things that maybe educators can bring into the classroom, big or small, to
Yeah,
talk about this topic?
absolutely. It doesn't have to be extravagant and it doesn't have to be like this, super intricate field trip that you plan. If you wanna do that, of course, that's awesome. Those are amazing memories and experiences for your students. But I think what you just said in many places in British Columbia, we're very lucky. Either we have a schoolyard that has, trees and plants, oftentimes, 5, 10, 15-minute walk off of school grounds. You can be in a public park, you might have a local stream, a local forest. Um, just like taking your students there, I think, and connecting what you're seeing outside, what your students are experiencing outside, to what you're learning in the classroom or with the curriculum. I think not only is that getting your students more exposure to the outdoors and kind of creating those formative memories outside, um, but in a lot of ways, I think students really thrive when they're able to connect some of the more like theoretical things they learn in the classroom to this real tangible thing outside that they're experiencing. I think that's very beneficial for the learning process of a lot of students. Um, and I mean, I work for Sierra Club, so I'm just gonna
Mhm.
say, like, some of the resources that we have, on our website, we have even if you aren't able to book a workshop with us for whatever reason, where we come in and, provide some of that, experience and interaction for your students, we have free curriculum packets, free lesson plans, where you can connect outdoors, the environment as you see it in your local area, as it exists in your local area to the BC curriculum. And so we're, as much as we can, we're trying to make it, pretty stress free and not be an extra burden for teachers because we know teachers have so much on their plates.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, that's something that we offer as well.
Is there one skill that the youth of today need in order to support some of these environmental challenges?
Yeah, I would say I know this might be a bit of a cliche, but I think it encompasses so many things as critical thinking skills.
Hmm.
Um, being able to apply these theoretical concepts to the environment around you. And when I say the environment around you, I mean, of course, like the actual environment, nature, but also all of these interconnected systems, our social and cultural systems, our political systems, our economic systems. Um, that ability to, yeah, to be able to think one step further, ask those questions, be curious, be engaged about what's happening around you, is so important. And those are the building blocks of a healthy, resilient community. Um, yeah. So I would say if I had to boil it down, it would probably be critical thinking.
Okay.
Mhm.
I want to get into some rapid fire questions. So, five things that I'm curious about Kaylee Smith, but the one person who has influenced your journey the most.
This is quite hard. I'm gonna say a little bit of a cop out answer because I feel like I can't boil it down to just one person. In some ways, my current career, my current position is like this blending of both of my parents' careers, which I think is really funny. They've certainly had an influence on my whole journey. But there's also just been so many different teachers, professors, mentors throughout the past decade that, even if it's just, like, in a small way or a fleeting way, like, have certainly influenced my trajectory, and so I feel like I really can't count out any of them either.
It's not a cop out. We'll allow it.
Thank you.
Okay, one book or resource you'd encourage everyone to read or follow.
Yeah, I have 2. The first one is our website, sierraclub.bc.ca. You can also follow us on, social media. We have all the social media platforms, but we're constantly posting just, like, so many different free events, webinars, like I was mentioning, worksheets and resources. I think we're really this amazing hub for all of those things. So I would definitely check that out. But besides that, I really recommend if people are wanting to get hopeful about the future and some of these things that I've talked about, building community resilience and finding agency within ourselves to solve these problems. I really recommend the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's an indigenous ecologist and scholar, and she provides a lot of really great anecdotes about healthy relationships that humans and the environment have, and like mutually beneficial relationships between humans and the environment, which I think in our mainstream media diet we may not get that perspective. So yeah, I would
Totally.
recommend that.
Thank you for sharing. What's one environmental myth that you'd like to bust or have busted?
Mhm. Yeah, I think um perhaps on that same note, when we think about conservation, I personally think of it as being synonymous with stewardship and these kind of reciprocal relationships between people in the environment that have existed for thousands and thousands of years. Unfortunately, in our mainstream society, we've strayed away from that reciprocity. um, but I think sometimes, when I work with students, talking about conservation, very understandably, it will kind of come into the conversation that humans are the problem and that if we went away, like, the environment would be fine. And I understand where people are coming from when they say that. But I think that is oversimplistic and it doesn't it kind of overshadows like these thousands of years of different societies, indigenous societies and nations around the country, around the province, but also globally that have had these stewardship and reciprocity relationships with the environment. Um, and so yeah, I guess that's you could kind of say that's a myth is that humans are the problem. I think in a lot of ways right now we are, but that's not how it has to be, and actually for a long time before this modern age, it wasn't like that. So,
Interesting. I feel like that's
yeah.
this we could do a part 2 just on that.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, a couple more questions for you before your final word. What is one thing that keeps you grounded?
Oh, so many things. Um, that appreciation, for the environment, the community around me. Um, I try to spend a part of my day, even if it's small, outside. And I mean, sometimes on a weekend I can be, really extravagant with that. I can um go up to Squamish and go rock climbing, or I can go camping or go on a big hike. But even if I'm not able to do that, just walking around my neighborhood, I live very close to a few different parks that are quite lovely. And yeah, just being present and appreciating and being grateful for those little things around me, the fact that I live in a very beautiful neighborhood, and I get to be outside and experience that. Yeah, I think that's definitely what helps me focus my efforts, focus my concentration on what I can affect, what is most tangible to me.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Two more. So your favorite place, however you identify that or quantify that, favorite place in BC, and then your favorite place in the world.
Yeah, my favorite place in BC, I live in Vancouver currently, and I do really love Vancouver. I think it's very rare to have it like we're in a city, we're surrounded by forests, we're surrounded by the ocean, and we're a short drive away from the mountains. Like I think we kind of have it all. I do have a very soft spot though for different parts of the interior of the province that I got to live in during my undergrad when I was doing research in those areas. They don't have the ocean, but ecologically speaking, they're still very diverse. And the communities there are just so welcoming, so warm. I'm still in touch with a few folks who live out there. So yeah, I think those would be my two answers.
And then, okay, in the world, you're saying the
In the
answer?
world, right, I forgot about that. So sorry, I had two answers for the BC part.
That's okay.
um, in the world, oh, that's so interesting. As part of my master's in Sweden, I tried to do as much travel around Scandinavia as I could. And I really enjoyed Norway. I
Mm.
think, similar to here on the West Coast, like they have forests, they have mountains, they have ocean. Um, and I really enjoyed the way of life, and it feels very yeah, it feels very community oriented. There's a lot of like socialized values, like egalitarian values in terms of like education being very free and accessible for people, free access to libraries and museums and things like that. So, yeah, I would say probably Norway.
I love that. My mom's from
Mhm.
Denmark, so I know what
Mm,
you're talking about. Very similar.
yeah, definitely.
Okay, the final word. What do you want our listeners to take away with today?
Yeah, I think, like, if any of the things that we talked about, interest you, inspire you, I think, checking out Sierra Club BC is a great way to start. And yeah, we're really here for wherever you are in your journey, whether you are just kind of learning about the environment, becoming concerned about its impacts, or you are an avid outdoors person, a lifelong advocate. Like we're here for all stages of where all people are at. And so, yeah, I would just recommend that you check us out, see what we have to offer, and see if you want to get connected with us.
Amazing. And then, how do people connect with you specifically, Kaylee,
Yeah.
if they want to,
So
and if you
yeah,
want that?
for sure. Yeah, super open to that. You can go to our website. We have a specific uh, education page. So, like in our kind of menu at the top of our website, there's a specific section for education. That's where you'll have access to all the resources and things that I've been talking about. But then my email is also there. So you can get in touch with me directly if you want to. Yeah.
Okay, I would
Yeah.
love to do another part two
Hmm.
down the road. I want to see how things are going for you personally, but also professionally. And
Hmm.
then, yeah, politics plays a huge part in our lives, and things may change local, provincially, nationally, but we'll take that in stride. But once we get into another year or two, I'd love to have you back and see how things are going.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds good. I'd be happy to.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.